to share with us some of their experiences. What's happening on September 30th? Do you guys know? It's your birthday. Well, happy early birthday, but what else is September 30th? What's important about that? Orange Shirt Day. What does Orange Shirt Day mean to us? Boarding schools? Yeah, right. So not everybody knew that. So today with us we have Brenda Slater. She came in earlier this year and shared some stories about her educational experience. We have Dr. Carol Davis and the Honorable Judge Andy Lavager. Hey guys. Now, I'm going to ask that we be on our best behavior, that we listen and give them the time that they've so rightfully so have earned. Let's be respectful. Let's hold off on the bathroom because I'm sure we can all make 45 minutes, okay? Let's be nice. I just want to lead this by, I know I'm breaking the rule, but I didn't have this printed, so I'm going to read this off. We're going to learn about something real. Resilience and resistance. The legacy of Native learning from Turtle Mountain elders. Here's the deal. Native people weren't just handed challenges. They lived through systems designed to erase language, culture, and even identity. But our Turtle Mountain elders didn't just survive that, they pushed back. They resisted. And they kept knowledge alive so the next generations, so that you guys could carry it forward. When we say Native learning, we're not talking about desks and worksheets, although they had that setting too. For our elders, there was still value about our land being the classroom. Stories they heard from the elders were the textbooks, and Turtle Mountain traditions were the lessons. What you're about to hear isn't just history. It's a witness to how our elders didn't just survive, but are thriving. It's proof that even when everything was stacked against them, Turtle Mountain elders found ways to protect and pass down their knowledge. As Orange Shirt Day approaches on September 30th, we want you guys to have an awareness about how far we've come in Indigenous education and acknowledge that here at TMCHS, we truly believe that every child matters. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Carol Davis, as you heard. My maiden name was Manette. And before we start, I'm here to talk about boarding schools, but before we start, I know there are some staff members here that who were probably enrolled at boarding schools. And if there are, would you please stand so we can acknowledge you? Because you also are survivors. Mayor, Stuart over here. Yes, that's the guy. What I'm going to share with you today is some experiences of my parents and grandparents, and also my own experience at boarding school. At one time, there was a boarding school here on our reservation. I should have looked up the name of it. I want to say it was St. Mary's, and it was located close to where the hospital is today. And my grandmother went to school there, and I think she was in that boarding school up to the 3rd grade. So she had a 3rd grade education. My grandfather had a 1st grade education, but he did not go to boarding school. My mother went to a school called Little Flower Mission on the Fort Houghton Reservation. And she was there in elementary school and then went to Stefan Mission in South Dakota for 2 years, and she dropped out of school when she was a 10th grader. My dad went to Fort Taunton, the government school in elementary, and he went to school in Flandreau in high school. He also dropped out after the 10th grade. My parents told stories about boarding schools, and my mother especially, and I always remember her quote about the Little Flower Mission. She said, if there's a hell, it's full of gray nuns. And they were extremely brutal to the children. She told about one young girl from here, I believe she was a bell guard. In the morning, the nun would come to the room where the girls were sleeping, and she would pull the blankets back from this little girl's bed. And if the little girl had wet the bed, and I guess she was a bedwetter, she would take this big strap and she would whip this little girl. And Mom said she developed a stutter and she wasn't able to speak, and she blamed that nun for doing that. There were stories like that she shared about Little Flower Mission, and so I understood why the Little Flower Mission was especially a bad place to be. But she said when she went to Flandreau, she was a little bit older, and she appreciated that they were able to have their own bed. A long time ago, our houses were like 2 rooms at the most. A lot of them were just 1 room. And everybody piled into beds at night. Some slept on the floors. But she said when she went to boarding school in South Dakota, she was able to sleep in her own bed. And they had 3 meals a day, so she said we were fed well. Her mother had died when she was 9 years old. And so she thought that was one of the reasons that she ended up in boarding school in elementary. And she felt that the experiences she had after that were largely because she lacked a mother. She said, I was in boarding school all those years, and only once did I get any money from any of my relatives. And she said, I got a dime from my sister-in-law, Elizabeth, who was married to her brother, Alan. So all the years she was in boarding school, she got only 1 dime. She experienced a lot of poverty. My dad told stories about being in sports. He was a football player. He said when they went to school, they went to classes for half a day, and the other half they worked in the farm. And so they worked around the cattle and horses. And they used that money that they, or whatever they were doing, to help run the mission schools that they were doing. And the government school was the same for him. He said they went to school half a day there, and they worked in the farm the other half of the day. My experience at boarding school was a bit different. I went to high school for 3 years on the Yankton Reservation in South Dakota, a school that came to be known as Marty Mission. And when I was in school at Marty, there was a lot of kids from all over the country. I think there were kids from Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, and we developed a real strong friendship with these students. It's just like now in your classes, if you had kids from 30 different places, you still were all in the same place doing the same thing. One thing that we did was we had charges, they called it. So we would get up in the morning and we would go to church, and then we would go to our charge, and then we would have breakfast. And after breakfast, we went to school. At noon, we went back to the cafeteria, and some of the girls would be sent over early to help get lunch ready. Then we would go and have lunch, and then we'd do our charges, which was usually cleaning the kitchen and the dining room areas. And then we went back to school in the afternoon. After lunch, after school, we would have supper, and then we went to study hall. So we all got good grades because we spent an hour in the study hall. Study hall was a real interesting place. It was a big room about half this size, and it had nothing but rows of desks. And we had an assigned seat. And I remember this, we used to do things like kids do, I guess. And I had a really good friend, her name was Gertie Zephyr, and she asked somebody if they could, she said, I really would like somebody to find me a little snake. So somebody found a little snake for her, and she brought that snake to study hall, and she put it on her desk, and I was sitting close to her so I could see. And this little snake started doing gold. Girls jumped up, started running and screaming. So Gertie grabs that little snake and she sticks it in her bra. And I thought, oh my God, what's this girl doing? And the sister comes out, and she had a little stage like where she sat and watched all of us to make sure we behaved. And she came down, and of course nobody told on Gertie. Gertie said she could just feel that little snake crawling all over her. So we did crazy things, and we had a lot of fun. We had a really good basketball team. When I was a junior, I left Marty and I came back to Belcourt and went to school here. I graduated from Belcourt High School. But the class that I was in were seniors, and they went on, and we belonged to a group of I guess you call it like, now they call it Class A, Class B. We were in the Catholic state, and we played, we only had 31 boys in high school. That's all that was left in the school, high school at Marnie when I left there. And these 31 boys were made of the sports. They had football, basketball, whatever. And they went on and they played Rapid City High School, Catholic school, which was, they had about 500 students, and they beat Rapid City in the tournament. And from there they went on and played Sioux Falls, Gorman. They had over 600 students, and they beat both of these Catholic schools, and they took Catholic state in 1962 with 31 boys in high school. Those boys were my classmates. They were all seniors, with the exception of Jean Wright. I think Jean Wright was a sophomore, but the rest of them were seniors. It was kind of fun in some ways. We joined things so we could get out of the school, otherwise you stayed there all the time. I was a cheerleader, and so I got to travel we got to travel with the team. And one of the girls, remember these are Catholic schools, so they were very strict. One of the girls got these polka dot underpants to wear under our skirts, and we were cheering at one of the home games, and the sister Renee was our cheerleader advisor, and she was sitting out in front of us. And when we spun around, she saw our polka dot underpants, and so she pulled all of us off the floor and made us go back to the dorm. We had to all give her back those polka dot underpants. She didn't think that was appropriate for us. Before I close, I'll give you a little information about how we got to Marty. We would have a set time to leave from St. Anne's, and we would get on a bus and we would drive. They would take us down to South Dakota, and that would be a 600-mile bus ride. And some first years I was there was actually 2 buses. That's how many kids would go from here. And then we would pick up students at Fort Hood and go on from there. The bus ride wasn't all that bad when you consider what the people before us did. In the 30s and 40s, when they took the bus rides to Marty, they used cattle trucks, and they would put the little kids at the bottom, and then they would put these boards over the top, so the little ones were at the bottom, and the big kids were at the top, and they rode. The top ones rode in the open air, and the little ones were where there was in the snow air, I guess. And they would take that 600-mile ride down to Marty. So it was difficult getting there. One of the things when you got to Marty, first time I went to Marty, I was so lonesome. I had never experienced that kind of loneliness. And it later helped me when I got older. After about 2 weeks, you begin to see, you're not in a blur anymore. All of a sudden, things become familiar, and people become familiar. You learn the names of the people around you, the kids, the teachers, in our case, the nuns. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, you got used to being there, and the loneliness would go away, and you would get into a routine. But when I went to college, I went to Boston, which is only 30 miles away. But it seemed like another world because I had never been to school with non-natives. I'd always been with our own people. And then at Marty, I was with natives from all over the United States. But here I was with people that were totally different from me, had totally different lives. I was used to reservation life. Now I was with people who would be like, now if you went to school and came from in a room, everybody was from Minot, and Bismarck, and Jamestown, and Grand Forks. That's all it was. And I was so lonesome. But then I remembered boarding school having that same feeling. And I thought, you know what? After I get familiar with the place, I bet I'll be okay. And I thank Marty for doing that for me. I did realize that loneliness would go away, and it did. With that, I thank you for listening to me. I have a couple other stories, but we've got other people that we want to hear from. So thank you for being so attentive.
Good morning. My name is Brenda. Most of you know me by now. I've been here before. When they asked me to come in and talk about boarding schools, my coming in and visiting with you guys is basically based on experiences of education. But at the same time, I had my mom and my grandma went to boarding school, and I did not go to boarding school. And so when they asked me, I kind of hesitated at first, but then they still talked me into coming in. And so what I did is I went back, and I brought it with me, was an interview that they had done with my mom. So my mom has been gone for 13, 14 years. So the other night I pulled this out and I actually read it to some of my grandkids and the experiences that my mom had, but at the same time what my grandma went through. And my mom was Mary Ann Gorno, married my dad, Edward Slater. And she started off her schooling at what we call St. Anne's or Ojibwa school, but back then it was called St. Anne's Mission. And then she went there till 8th grade, I believe. And then she went on to Stefan for a couple of years. And then from Stefan, she went and she graduated from Fort Totten. What I'm reading, and I never really realized, is the difference between the two boarding schools. With Stefan was a Catholic boarding school, and Fort Totten was basically a boarding school but didn't have like nuns or priests there. And that's where my mom had graduated. Some of the things that my mom did talk about throughout the years of boarding school was my mom was a very good seamstress. And when I was learning to sew and do different things, I was always taught that nothing had to be perfect, because the only one that is perfect and does things perfect is our Creator. So if we make mistakes, we make mistakes. But with my mom, with her sewing and everything, I used to tell her that, like, Mom, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can, you know, we can make mistakes. And she'd say, oh no. And she would, whatever she was making, if she made a mistake, she would rip it open and start over. And she said that that was because of the sewing that she would learn in boarding schools, is that if it wasn't perfect, they would come and they would make her start over. So she became a perfectionist because of it. I was just reading one of the things, and you know, with my grandma, which would have been my mom's mom, my grandma went through the harder times of boarding school because of speaking the language and really having to go and be there. With my mom, the reason my mom did leave, she was the youngest of 6, and the boys went to boarding school, and my mom said that she didn't really have to go, but then in her high school years, my grandpa had got hurt, and so she went to boarding school because it was easier on the family because of my grandpa being hurt. Winter was going to be harder. The food supply, everything at home was not going to be there. So that's why she went to boarding school. And some of the things that I learned about her being in boarding school was the discipline that they had. She talked, there was one thing I was going to say that I was going to read. In the interview, she was asked what she learned, and she said that I learned responsibility, and I learned the importance of an education because that's what they drilled into your head. I mean, the attitude they had is they're going to make you or break you. You were going to learn, and when I stopped to think of the teachers we had, they pushed and pushed and pushed until they knew that they could get everything that they could out of you. And then the interviewer asked, did she have any favorite teachers? And she said, not really. Everything was all business. For you to just sit around and visit, that never happened. It never happened while I was there anyway. Everything was, I'm kind of reading it how my mom said it, so it says everything was, you do this, you do this, you do this. And I think that's where I learned structure, you know, that, and goals. That was one thing they pounded into your head. Goals, you know. If you're ever going to accomplish something, you have to have goals. I remember Sister Marion, she was the principal. That was all she ever talked about. You can't be something if you don't try and set your goals. So, and then they asked about the language. My mom did speak the language, she never taught it to us, but she'd always talk with my grandpa and my grandma. And I always asked why they didn't teach it to us, and it would always went back to they didn't want us to be punished. They didn't want us to get in trouble over speaking the language. So that's why I always thought growing up that they taught that language so we didn't understand, so that we didn't know what they were talking about, their business. That's when it was something confidential. Is the only time that they actually spoke it in the home, when they didn't want the kids to understand what they were talking about. But otherwise, the reason why we lost our language and why it's so hard for us now today is because our parents, our grandparents, they loved us enough, they loved us so much that they didn't want us to get in trouble. So that's why our language is hard to come back. And now with our schools, we have those opportunities to learn all of that. Back then, we didn't. The government and everything else, they tried to take those things away from us. And then there was a point in time where they had to try to give it back to us. And it's really hard to give it back to us and for us to learn it because we've lost so much. So that's all we can do is just continue to try. There was another time I met this lady, an elder lady in Belcourt, and I just happened to be at her house, and she asked who my parents were, and I told her my mom was Mary Ann Gorno. And she said, Mary Ann was my big sister. And I kind of wondered like how she was her big sister. So, come to find out, and I found it in this interview as well, that the older girls had to take care of the younger girls. So it was like a big sister, little sister program. And they were responsible for those little ones. So this lady had, my mom had already passed on and everything. And it was really nice to hear her say how my mom was such a good big sister to her. Especially, she said, for her, she was young in the elementary, crying, lonesome for home, didn't have anybody else. So she connected with my mom, and it basically gave them responsibility again because my mom had to make sure this little girl was dressed, cleaned, clothes ironed, hair cleaned, everything that you would do as a big sister for a little sister. And the lady that I'm talking about, she also said, your mom is the one who pierced my ears. She said I was so proud of my earrings that she remembered my mom putting earrings on her and fixing her up to be such a cute little girl in school over there. So they had those connections. Another thing that I read in here was they didn't really make friends. Some of them they did, but she said basically you stuck with whoever was family. Her brothers went to school there, she had some cousins, but they were in different areas. Like Carol said, the boys worked on farms, and the girls did a lot of the cleaning, sewing, washing clothes, different things. So they didn't have as much freedom as the boys did. She talked about, she also talked about how the boys kind of stuck together, because if they ran away from the boarding schools, when they got back, the way they were punished was by getting their head shaved. So all the boys together would shave their heads, so that boy wasn't the only one. So I thought that was pretty good that they supported one another in that way. Another thing that I remember asking when I was probably a sophomore, I had asked if I could go to boarding school. And I thought it was my mom. I thought it was my mom who said no. But after reading this again, I realized that she would have sent us to boarding school because she felt that that's where she did learn to discipline herself. She became independent. She said she learned to save money. She learned, like I said, to be independent, and she learned to be stronger as an individual. And she felt that every child should be able to go off on their own for that purpose. And in here it states that it was because of my dad. So yeah, we were all dad's girls. There was 3 of us, so we stuck close to home with our dad. My mom had arthritis very, very badly. She was in a wheelchair by the time probably, I'm going to say late 50s, and she always blamed the hard work because you didn't use mops, it was everything on your hands and knees. She talked about the mission school, the St. Anne's, and some of the experiences there seemed like it was, and I'm not going to say anything bad about the church itself because today it's totally different. And my dad is a very strong Catholic, and he will stick up for the church. But at the same time, there are incidences that happened back then that my mom talked about, and it was like if you were late getting to class, you had to go and kneel in the gravel, and Carol and I were talking about that this morning, and you had to cut the grass up there on the sidewalk. Those buildings that they took down up there at the church, St. Joe's, those buildings before that, they would have to cut the grass with the scissors and trim it. So it wasn't no lawnmower or anything like that, it was with the scissors. And they would have to cut from there all the way to the church and get everything ready for St. Anne's Day. And my mom had really long hair. And I remember her telling me that one time the boys took her hair and tied it around a tree or something outside at St. Anne's up here and tangled it into the tree or whatever. So by the time she got her hair unmangled and everything else and got up to the classroom, the nuns were pretty upset with her. And she told them what happened. So they cut her braids off and they told her, okay, you won't have that problem anymore. So it was boarding schools that we had a lot of trauma, but we also had a lot of serious discipline even within the reservation. My sisters went to St. Anne's. I didn't. I came to we called it the government school back then, which is our school here, Turtamong. So in the summertime, I had to go to the mission school for the religion classes. And they were strict. It was pretty strict. You did learn discipline and you did learn responsibility and you learned not to be late. And those things, they kind of instill in you because I'm a person that I get anxiety even today if I find that I'm going to be late for something. And it's only because of, being a little kid and being disciplined about being late or not having things done right. It gives you an anxiety. So there's a lot more that I could share with this. I might even try to leave a copy with somebody if I'm willing to share this interview packet with maybe Jackie or your principal or somebody where they can keep it in a safe place if anybody ever wants to read it. I think I'm really glad to have it today that it talks about my mom's experience with boarding schools. And again, like I said, oh, and then it did say that she went to school in Bismarck. There was a boarding school in Bismarck. I didn't know there was one there. I do remember, what's his name? The runner, Billy Mills had come to St. John one time, and he asked me if I knew about a boarding school in Bismarck because he said he wanted to find it because his sister went there. And it was about the same time as when my mom would have been there, but I had no clue. I had no clue that there was one in Bismarck. And she also talked about a school that was actually in Belcourt when my grandpa went to school called the Gorno School. I did not know that there was one. And reading this, I also found out that my grandpa attended school for a half a day, and he dropped out. So that's how much education my grandpa had. But my grandpa knew 5 languages he could speak. He didn't know how to read or write, but he could speak the languages because he wasn't affected by boarding schools. He was a hard worker and worked with his dad. My grandma, on the other hand, was very, very strict. She didn't believe, she was a homemaker, she stayed home. She was affected by boarding schools as to that discipline part. And when I even started having my family and I was working, she gave me a lot of grief about being a mother and working because she didn't believe in that. She felt that a mom was supposed to stay home with their kids and that dad was supposed to be out there making a life and providing for their family. So my grandma and I had a lot of talks about that because she couldn't understand why I was trying to work, why I was trying to get an education. Because in her belief, it was you stay home and protect your family. That's what she'd say. You stay home, and the only one that can protect your family is the mom. That's what she would say. So that was all part of that. Protection and not letting them get hurt and everything else, probably from boarding schools. She just never said it in that way. But for now, I'm going to let Mr. Andy talk.
I think they saved me for last because I can talk for about 3 hours straight without stopping. When Jackie called me, it took me a little while and I thought, yes, I need to be part of this. I was listening to their stories and they were talking about older people. And I knew all of the people most of the people that they talked about. It's all good. Like Grandma Adeline, talked about Grandma Adeline. Her grandma and my grandma were first cousins. And then Caroline talked about her family. And my grandmother, her first husband passed away when my mother was 6 years old. And my grandmother married her grandpa. So we're first cousins. So we're related, plus she's part Lavager. She won't tell anybody that, but she's part Lavager. And so we know each other's families. I grew up, I was really close to my Mushim and my Kuka Davis. I was always with them. I used to take off from our house out in the country early in the morning, walk through the woods and go stay with my grandma. Parents never worried about me because they knew where I was. So I heard a lot of stories from them. And I'll talk about them first and I'll talk about myself and my experiences. All of my grandparents, and I'm sure theirs, were born in the 1800s. My grandpa Lavacher was born in 1878. My grandma Lavacher was born in 1880. My grandpa Wilkie and my grandpa Davis were born in the 1870s, late 1870s, and my Coco was born in 1899. So they had that old world experience, and they talked about a long time ago all the time. My grandpa Lavacher went to Fort Totten boarding school, and there was a lot of people from here that went there, and that had to be the late 1800s. They went there, and it was hard. It was hard for them because the way they were treated. My grandma Betsy went to Bismarck Indian School, and she talked about that and how hard it was. And her sisters were with her. She went there with her sisters, and how they had to suffer because they couldn't speak their language, and they had to fight with other kids. And there was it was just really hard. They never went home after they went there. They stayed there all summer, every year, year after year after year. They were farmed out. That's what they called it, farmed out. And Grandma Betsy and her sister Melrose in Virginia, they would work for this white family. They owned a brewery, and they were supposedly well off down in Bismarck. And they had to dress a certain way and act a certain way, and they didn't like it at all. They never got paid. They just had to live there and work there. And they used to always worry about my Auntie Melrose, my grandma's sister, because when that guy would ring a bell, I want my tea, I want my tea. So she'd hurry up and go make tea, and just before she'd bring water, she'd spit in that cup and she'd stir it. That's how much they didn't like those people. And they used to always laugh about that after. Yeah, we got them good. But it was hard for them, not being around their family, not seeing their family, and it was hard on all of them. My grandma Betsy, my great-grandma, she went to boarding school when she was very young, and I'm talking the 1800s, and she ended up going to school in Quebec. And they forced her to learn French language. And then they drew the border, the 49 parallel. They drew that, and they found out that her family was in the United States. So then they brought her all the way back over here, and she ended up at another boarding school, and they forced her to talk English. And so when she was done, she made it all the way to 8th grade, by the way, which was a big accomplishment back then. But when she had her own family, she didn't like it when people came in her house and spoke English, and she wanted them to speak their language, because that's how much she suffered, and that's how much she hated it, that she had to learn all these other things. So my grandma then had that mindset. My aunties, my uncles, I had my auntie Shishi, my mom's sister. Her name was Shishi, that means duck. And she went to Fort Totten boarding school. And when she went there, she was really young. And she said they really suffered there. She only spoke her language. She said when they'd catch them speaking their language, they would, and she said it happened to her, she told me directly this happened to me, they would stick a rubber band around the end of their tongue and leave it there. And they'd have to sit there, and they'd keep an eye on them. They punished them that way, stick a rubber band around their tongue. That was in Fort Totten. They had a brother, his name was Arthur. The Thatcher, that's what they used to say in Mitchell, that means like That's like saying Archer and Iban. That's like saying Iban on the end of a word. They say Dafan. But my grandma always cried about him. He was taken to boarding school. His name was Arthur Wilkie. And he died over there at Fort Todd. And they didn't tell my grandma. They didn't tell my mom's family. And they buried him over there. We still don't know where his grave is. It's in Fort Todd. I let Denise and all that know about that. I don't know if they're trying to search for that. But they had lost. And nobody had any compassion for them. My grandma Betsy used to cry all the time. The Thatcher, she'd cry. Because that was her boy. He died over there. No closure. There was no closure. All those things are real. All those things happen to our families. Your families too, from way back. My mom, she went to Savannah with her brother George and her brother Philip. And they didn't like it there. They always wanted to leave. And I think a big part of it was voluntary. I don't think they were forced. They were there, but when they got there, they didn't want to stay. And they would see other kids trying to take off, run away, they'd get caught, and they'd bring them back, they'd shave their heads. Kind of, I don't know, all the other kids would be looking at them, oh, well, they got caught, you know. My mom decided, I'm going to go home. And she was quite young. She was maybe 13 years old, 14, 13. And she took off from Savannah. And she stole horses. She's always telling the story. She would steal horses and she would ride all night north. Then in the morning, she'd let the horses go and she'd go hide in the bushes. And then she'd do it again. And she did that, and she made it all the way home here from Savannah by horseback. My own Mushroom Davis, they were going to try to make her go back, and he got mad. There's no way you're going to take my girl. She's staying right here. And he stood up to them, stood up to those people that were trying to make Mom go home. That's Carol's grandpa, my grandpa that we shared. And so he stuck up for her, and she didn't have to go because he said, they're not going to cut my girl's hair. She had long, kind of curly hair. I don't know if Carol will remember that. So she had to stay home. So her brothers were saying, well, look at Betty. She got to go home, and Grandpa fought for her. Dad fought for her. And so they thought, well, we're going to go home too. But then they saved up their money. They bought a train ticket. There was a train that come all the way from south, and it would come through Rolla, a passenger train. So they took that train and they got a hold of my grandpa, and he met them at the train in Rolla. He had a ticket for them. He sent them right back. He says, you're not brave like Betty, you go back, he said. So my mom used to always say when their brothers come home, they had shaved heads, and she used to laugh about that. Because they're not brave like me, she said. But anyway, those stories are there. You know, the way they talked about the way things happened to them. And I always heard those stories, and I always encouraged my older relatives to help me to learn who I was, learn who I am. Because they had the language. They had all kinds of teachings. One of the first things I remember when I was growing up is being at a ceremony. Sitting on my dad's lap, being at a ceremony. Seeing a fire and hearing singing. They did those things for us because they were deprived and they wanted us to make sure and learn who we are. And so all of that hardship that they went through, They resisted later on in life because they started thinking about it, and they started thinking about what was taken away from us. And they started pulling that out and showing us. They had that resentment, but they healed it by showing us younger kids how to live our lives. And I heard that from both of them because they said the parents told them, you know, they taught us to be responsible, all those things, but there's more to it than that. They taught us all kinds of other things. So all those things happened. Then when I was growing up, and we went to the mission, St. Anne's, and this was in the 60s, earlier, and it was hard going there. That wasn't a boarding school, it was a day school. You know, we went there, went home every night. But the way they treated you, in some ways it was good, in some ways it was just horrid. I saw someone ask a question if they asked you to wash off the color of your skin. I've seen that happen. It happened to me. We were in the bathroom that night. You wash, you get all that brown off your skin. That happened. I've seen the priest in the priest's house. And I'm telling you negative stuff because you guys have to know what happened. In the priest's house, that first door, there was an empty room. That's where kids got punished. It was a white room, not very big. The only thing hanging in there was a belt. And if you were called over to the priest's house, you knew you were going to get it. And all those other things about the rulers, all that stuff happened. There was good things that happened, but you get scarred when you witness or when you receive that punishment. It hurts you. And so I saw all of that, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. One time, there was a nun. To this day, I still don't remember what I did, and maybe I'll share with you guys the nun's name, but she chased me into the boys' bathroom with a baseball bat. I went in the stall, I was holding that door, and she was hitting that baseball bat. She was going to kill me. I thought, what? And so, as soon as I waited quietly for a long time, and I figured she was gone, and then I took off from school and went home. So there's things like that that we've experienced, but it did hold us back. Today we're all different. We have this compulsion to show young people how to live their lives in a good way, because we've experienced some of the other things. I've got more to say about that doggone bell. Maybe we could talk to the principal and we could stay here all day, all right? But anyway, thank you. I wish I could say more. In fact, I have a lot to say.
1 second, guys. So if we take anything from what Mr. Lavager had just said there, don't let your circumstances define you. Do work hard, show up every day, and take what you can from the educational experiences provided. One more round of applause for our elders. All right.